Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me on behalf of both offices at the Department of Energy. And we represent the other $2 billion of the $3 billion or so spent here by the federal government. And I'm here to provide the economic outlook, as well as talk and laud some of the accomplishments that we've made at DOE here this year. So thank you, Mike, Gary, and Carl for having us. This is an excellent forum to communicate and broadcast the progress as well as the future that we see in the economic outlook for Hanford. Okay, so from a Hanford cleanup overview, this is kind of a 101. Our mission basically is broken down into three components: tank waste, the Central Plateau remediation cleanup, and the River Corps remediation cleanup. We're in the business of remediating the waste from the Manhattan Project and subsequent plutonium production industry in the United States that occurred from 1943 through roughly 1989. We've been working this for 26 years now, so as you'd expect, there's quite a bit of accomplishment from that standpoint. We're known as quite an expensive beast out there. I know we have a reputation for waste and fraud and a lot of abuse, but I'll tell you that's a wrong impression that you should have about what work is being done out there. From a standpoint of the 26 years of accomplishment, this work is expensive. It's very complicated. Our primary objective is to protect our public. Our secondary and just as equal objectives are to protect our co-located and workers out there in this extremely hazardous work. We started, of course, with the national labs, like Steve discussed. The labs were brought here in conjunction with the Hanford mission. Clearly, they've broadened out into a lot more diversity, and they still supply us an element of technical support that is critical to our mission. The cleanup work is primarily focused on emptying underground tank waste. That's the mission of the Office of River Protection. And then the Richland mission has the rest of the mission, which is remediating the facilities, structures, burial sites, and groundwater contamination that emanated from the production facilities back in the day when that industry was in full measure. So 2 operational offices and 5 different contractors, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So from the accomplishments and by the numbers, you can see the Office of River Protection is responsible for 177 underground tanks. It's 56 million gallons of mixed radioactive chemical waste. We call it mixed rad waste. It's the worst of the worst types of materials ever created by mankind. We're talking about thousands of different types of chemicals mixed with radioactive sources. Those have to be processed, and it's extremely hazardous work and very costly and expensive to keep our workers protected and safe. So you can see in the last 26 years, the accomplishment we've got here, 2.5 million gallons of waste has been retrieved across 2 different tank farms broken down below. We've got 15 tanks emptied at this point of the 177, and we've created about 1.9 million gallons of space in our double shell tanks, which will be critically important to our mission as we bring up our vitrification facility that will glassify this waste for final burial in a repository. And you can see the other things here. We've got 68 million gallons of liquid that we've removed from single shell tanks to stabilize those tanks in case they have leaks. We currently have 2 tanks that are leaking very small amounts in the environment. T111, which is the single shell tank, and then double shell tank AY102, which is not leaking into the environment, but it still is leaking between one tank and another. So we've got a critical mission out there, a lot going on. And then lastly, you see the 65-acre site for the waste treatment plant complex. That's a huge facility. It's roughly the size of 2 commercial nuclear reactors. Right now it's a $12.3 billion project. And it's broken down. Basically what that facility does is it takes this hazardous waste from the tanks, splits it into a high-level waste stream and a low-activity waste stream, and then glassifies it in a vitrified form inside a stainless steel container for final burial. That's basically the summary of the mission for Office of River Protection. When you look at that facility, it's huge. To commission that size of a facility at one time would be extremely difficult, so we've broken that facility into pieces and parts. And so now you'll start hearing a mission called direct feed law. And what we're basically doing is feeding the low activity waste facility, which is about 90% complete at this point, with low activity waste coming directly from the tanks. And that mission, we're expecting to deliver early 20,000, so 2020 rather, so around 2021, 2022 in that time frame, we're expecting to start making glass. And that's a huge milestone. Of course, that'll be almost 32 years into the mission. We expected that mission to come a lot sooner, but it's a very complex mission, and we're actually doing things out there that have never been done before in industry in the United States. Some of the things that we're coming across are things that nobody's ever had to solve before. So it ends up with delays, and those delays look like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? Why can't they stay on schedule? Well, there's reasons, and it's very difficult to communicate that sometimes and understand it. For the Office of the Richland Operations Office, they have the rest of the mission, including all of the facilities and the reactors and the groundwater mission along the river corridor as well as in the Central Plateau. You can expect the scale of this production facility at the time with the large 6 canyon facilities and 9 reactors was just a scale that is just not imaginable for most people unless you've been out there. And you can see the progress that they've made. 6 of the 9 reactors are cocooned. That means that they're stabilized. They're going to stay that way for about another 40 years before, as we allow them to decay a bit before we tear them down. We've got 2 more that are in the process of being cocooned. All of the nuclear fuels are removed from those reactors. We've got, as you can see, about 100% of the spent fuel has been removed from the site. This is extremely hazardous material. The same type of material that was driving the Fukushima incident in Japan, that's been removed. 13 billion gallons of contaminated water have been treated. This is basically where we pump contaminated water from the Central Plateau area where that water had been dumped. As it circulates down through the groundwater and through the soil and hits our groundwater, we actually pump that groundwater out, treat it, and then pump it back in a cycle that basically prevents or creates a barrier for that material to get to the Columbia River. So huge amount of progress. That 13 billion gallons has really been done in the last 4 to 5 years. And as you can see on the next, let's see, it's not on this slide, but it's on a subsequent slide, we're treating over 2 billion gallons a year now of groundwater. And what that means basically to the average citizen in the Tri-Cities is that that groundwater is not making it to the Columbia River with any contamination in it. So basically the barriers for protecting the public, protecting workers are in place now and mature, and it's only going to get better from here. As you look further at the accomplishments in the Richland office, 1,291 waste sites have been remediated, 850 facilities. We've got 12,000 tons of contaminated soils that have been processed and reburied. Just the scale is unimaginable, and we're roughly 30 to 40% into this mission. So a lot more progress needs to be made, but we've made a lot of progress in the last 26 years, and that's certainly a great thing. In the last year, Office of River Protection has completed its 15th single shell tank retrieval. Again, that's trying to get that material out of the single shell tanks because there's no barrier between those and the ground. We've processed 1.9 million gallons in the evaporator. We've implemented direct feed low activity waste path forward, talking about getting that facility online as quickly as possible. You probably saw in our consent decree negotiations, we talked about 2039 time frame of bringing the entire plant on. That doesn't mean we can't bring that low activity waste facility on earlier and start processing waste, and that's exactly what we're doing. We've resumed production engineering at the high level waste facility. That's the other facility that makes glass out of the high level waste, and so that's going on track. We've implemented a plan to improve worker safety against vapors. We've been dealing with vapors since the inception of the tanks out there. People have been exposed to vapors, and we're at a point now where with those exposures, we want to make sure that people are not being exposed to any kind of contamination that can hurt them in any way, shape, or form. So we're solving that problem as we speak today. And lastly, we've evaporated 3,000 gallons of water from T111, which is the tank that's leaking. Without water in that tank, there's no way for it to leak. So that's the idea behind that. As you look at Richland Operations Office, they're continuing work on the plutonium finishing plant. That's the heart of the beast. PFP was the place where they took all the plutonium nitrate and ended up with pure plutonium pucks that were used in weapons. And that was one of the more complex facilities. It was chemically, extremely complex chemical process, a lot of acids, a lot of caustics. So at that point, bringing this building down, which we expect to have it down this year and early into next year, that's just a huge milestone for the Richland office and should be quite a celebration for the community from that standpoint, because really that is probably the most complex, most hazardous facility ever created in the weapons program, and it's coming down this year. Very exciting. And we've completed the chromium cleanup along the Columbia River. You probably saw the deep digs where we actually dug down almost to 85 and 90 feet in some cases. To dig down that deep is an engineering marvel if you look at it. So there's quite a bit of activity going on and continues to go on the river corridor, which is ahead of schedule and under budget. So great job by the Richland office as well. When you look at Hanford's prime contractors, you probably are familiar with these. We have 5 major contracts. If you add up the total contract value, these are 10-year contracts, it's about $28.5 billion over those 10 years. We average about $2.3 billion per year in funding, direct funding. So clearly these are huge contracts. Also note, we're on the 7th and 8th year on some of these contracts, so we're looking at the acquisition process now, going into 2017 and 18 to actually start replacing these contracts with the future work. So that's an activity that's starting up right now, and so you'll probably see different players with the exception of Bechtel, which is a construction contract. Hanford site, like I talked about, is roughly $2.3 billion per year. From that standpoint, across those 5 contracts, about $720 million of that is subcontracted to local industry and local businesses. I've got another breakout later about the small business side of it, but a significant amount of money from that standpoint. 9,305 total DOE federal and contract employees. When you look at that, that's roughly, it's harder to do the assignment of what the salaries are, but it's between $600 and $700 million of salaries per year are pumped into the Tri-City economy. And from the standpoint of the future outlook, the outlook looks good. It's stable. We expect to see current funding levels for the foreseeable future. We do have a growth in the ORP, the Office of River Protection's mission. You'll see that in a second. And then that cleanup mission, we estimate will go to at least 2050 to 2060 in that time frame. It's hard to gauge because between now and then you can have technology development, you can have a lot of different things happening that'll make that more efficient. You can also find things that might drive that mission longer. So it's a complex place. When you look at recent budget history, you can see 16 and 15. Richland budget is pretty consistent at about $1 billion per year. That's the light blue. The dark blue is Office of River Protection. And you can see our mission's kind of starting to grow. We grew $200 million between 15 and 16. Last year was $1.2 billion. This year's $1.414 billion. And we'll have some more slight growth needs as we continue into the foreseeable next 5 years. But we're probably stable at $2.3 to $2.4 billion of federal funding at this site. So that's where we're at right now, and that's the current history of it. Again, the outlook will be stable for the next foreseeable future. When you break down the subcontractors' spending, you can see that in fiscal year 14 and 15, I've got some numbers on this, but the numbers aren't germane. You can see that from a standpoint of about $700 million going to subcontracts, a lot of it is going across, and I don't think you can see the titles underneath there, goes across small business, local Tri-City business, and Washington. That's what those the three titles of those categories are. I'm not sure why they didn't print out or look out on this part. Oh, there it is right there. You can see small business, local business, and Washington State. So you can see the blue there is for this year, and roughly about $240 million has already gone to subcontracts. And again, it's about the same ratio as it was in 14 and 15. So a lot of that money is passed through to small businesses. And you might ask yourself, how can I get a piece of that work? If you go on the government website that I'll display at the last slide, each of the contractors has a button basically when you go and link to their websites of how to do business with Hanford. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. When you look at the types of things that we're doing, it's not all nuclear work. It's not all going to be anti-seize and radiometers and detectors or anything like that. There's a lot of things that go into the small business needs at the Hanford site. And this is something definitely to pay attention to if you're a business person in the Tri-City area. In addition to the salaries that pass through, we've got strong needs across all these types of services, and the services are for anything that you'd expect for a small city. So maybe a large city, I don't know. So that's where we're at. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the Manhattan National Historical Park Tridec has been very much involved with this, bringing this into the area. A lot of development, a lot of good buzz. As you know, in November of last year, this was placed into law. And from that standpoint, the pass-through and the opportunities that come with a national park brings a totally different type of tourist. And so we expect to see some significant benefit from that. And you can see this has been a development that's been shared across a number of different entities to bring it here and bring this to fruition. So it's been an outstanding job by the community, outstanding job by DOE and its partners with the National Park Service and the Department of Interior. And you can see we're kind of taking slow steps into developing this. Department of Interior is cash poor, and Department of Energy has a limit on what we can spend on this, but probably in 4 to 5 years' time, this will be a mature and well-developed capability out there on the site. And when you look at that footprint for what's available out there to be part of the national park, there's a significant number of other sites that are germane to that effort. There's things that could be developed that could just add more draw, if you will, across that Manhattan Project National Park. So exciting times out there from a standpoint of going from a legacy of waste management and plutonium production to remediation, and now into explaining and describing that history in a national park as something to be very proud of for the community. From a community impact standpoint, I can't cover that in the amount of time we have. We're on the same order from a standpoint of the advocacy, the giving, and the volunteerism that 9,000 people make in the community. It's a significant impact. Many of us are on boards, or we participate in a lot of the local community philanthropic efforts. There's a lot of support for the combined federal campaign as well as United Way. So everybody does something. I know in my office, we try and get 100% participation in the community, and it's just amazing how much these people give to the community and support all of the causes that make this a great place to live. So on the last couple slides here, I just wanted to show you a picture of the plutonium finishing plant. Again, this is the heart of the beast. This is where it all happened at the end of the day when uranium was taken to a reactor and then taken to a canyon and turned into plutonium. This is where it all happened at the end state. This is one of the most complex, dangerous, hazardous, and difficult facilities to tear down, and it's on its dying legs. It's got a couple glove boxes left, and then they'll start going into the D&D process, and that process is where they're actually tearing the building out. That'll happen later on this year. So very exciting times for Richland office. And in the Office of River Protection, like I said, we were on our 15th tank retrieval, and this is nothing you ever want to actually drop into, but if you ever wondered what a tank looked like, we always show these kinds of pictures. This is C-102. The other day we were talking to an elementary school class, and they said, we've heard there's peanut butter in there, and it does kind of look like peanut butter a little bit. It definitely has the consistency of a cementatious peanut butter, and this is the case where we have to pump that material out. That's what's going to be mixed with glass former, turned into glass, put in a chrome cylinder or a stainless steel cylinder, and then buried as material waste. So that's what it looks like, and those are the two primary missions for both offices. So wrapping up, if you want to find out more about the Hanford mission or about ways to do business with Hanford, go to hanford.gov. Again, the outlook is stable, about $2.3 to $2.4 billion per year. I see that for the next 4 to 5 years. We have a growing mission at ORP. Those needs will continue to be met. We have to be creative about how we do that, innovate, use Lean Six Sigma, and find ways to do things more efficiently and save your taxpayer dollar and use it properly. So that's what we're all about out there. Thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of the outlook.